Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yuzril and welcome once again to the Tribble Timewarp. Today is the 20th of October and yesterday saw a new patch go in which has, amongst other things, the first pass of the new reputation system. We have two factions to begin with, the Romulans, or at least the new Romulan Star Empire, now rebranded and reformulated, 20% more conquest, 100% less calories, and if it goes like the new Coke, we'll be going back to the old Romulan Star Empire in a couple of years. You wait and see. The other faction is Task Force Omega. The vendors have been, well, sacked. So now they're just standing here looking forlorn, waiting to be sent on their next suicide mission. I gather they're also waiting on the red spray paint for their body armour. Instead, we have Commander Roxy, who doesn't really do much either. I've had a little problem here with the background. Sometimes that has come up flat white, here it's come up flat black. I'm honestly not sure if that's intended or not, but her sole role is now to point you to the new UI for Reputation, and indeed the store, which I suppose has the advantage that at least it's not going to turn Deep Space Nine into the galaxy's biggest traffic log jam. Hi there. So, on to the UI. New tab, as she said, Reputation. Task Force Omega. We have 5 tiers. Those of you who are familiar with the Starbase rep system will be absolutely at home here. Tier 1 requires a mere 5,000 reputation. Now you get this through projects, as you might imagine. We have 2 projects available. One files a situation report on the status of the Borg threat, gets you 2,000 STF reputations. So basically do that 3 times and you're happy. Interestingly, despite saying Omega marks, it's still using the fleet mark icon here, so I'm assuming that just needs to be an update. Dilithium, expertise. I can only assume that these requirements are placeholders. They are very similar to a Romulan rep mission. In fact, they're identical. Let me see if I can find it. Here we are. Support colonization efforts. Romy marks, dilithium, expertise, provisions, water purifications, and entertainment. While it makes sense for colonization efforts to need those supplies, Borg situation reports? Okay, I mean, I can understand needing entertainment provisions after seeing report after report saying, hey guys, there's a massive horde of cyber zombies coming our way and we're all probably doomed. I, for one, welcome our new cybernetic overlords, because it's either that or the Federation's entire annual output of SSRIs, but purification systems and water make much less sense. I suppose you could argue that they need to replace the water purification on board Deep Space Nine after a mere 2 days of reading those reports, because everyone looks at it and then runs for the toilet, but provisions, I know Quarks is expensive, but hey, there you go. The other mission is 800 reps, so about 1/3, well, technically this one is 2.5 times exactly. Sloppy maths is sloppy. But interestingly, the Omega icon's in place for that one. Dilithium, 2 duty officers, bit of expertise, 20 hypos and 20 regenerators. Okay. Fair enough. I can just toggle down to the local sickbay and pick some of those up. Apparently, Borg research materials, well, I suppose strictly speaking it's not Borg tech you're handing over. I suppose they do need lab supplies, but oh wow. Omega must be really badly funded if they're scrounging around for basic stuff like that. And I'm not going to get those 2 duty officers back either, am I? Ugh, that isn't submitting research materials, that's them trying to scrounge up because their funding's been cut. Anyhow, back to the status page. So, each tier you get a choice of 1 special ability, unless of course it's tier 5, in which case there's only one. I have to wonder if there's going to be a mechanism to reset this. It would make sense as a dilithium and or reputation and or material sink, because otherwise you're going to have a certain amount of buyer's remorse every single time they tweak the patch notes on this one. So let's see what we get. Health regeneration 0.005. It would be nice to have that translated into hit points per second, as opposed to a flat 30 weapon proficiency skill, which is actually a fairly generous little chunk of damage. Let's see. Space equivalent, weapon training by 30. Likewise, space equivalent again. Health regeneration in space. Okay, that needs to be tweaked. Again, hull points per second, please. Omega rep slows down Borg adaptation. Interestingly, of course, that one has been tweaked. 4 shield points every second, which is pretty decent. That is about, yeah, 1% per second passive. That... Placate. That, however, I can't tell if that icon is actually an Omega one, or if that's a little Romulan symbol overlaying the shield. I think it is, so that's another asset that needs to be tweaked. Passive shield regeneration. Again, bear in mind that while that number's bigger, ship shields are comparatively heavy. And the final one is, for medics at least, a really, really nice buffed up version of the AoE nanite cloud. 10-minute recharge. Yeah, that could very well come into the category of so awesome nobody is ever going to use it because the next crisis might be 10 seconds away. However, as an anti-wipe mode, meh, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see also whether the heal all allies... Ah, right, seek out and heal or resuscitate allies. So it'll probably apply the heal first, then the resuscitation. Revived allies are immune to damage for 2 seconds, and disabled for 3. Okay, that's interesting. So you're going to have a 1 second gap in which you can't do anything, but you can still be hit. Okay, so what else do we get? Mark 10 anti-Borg weapons, the assimilated console and deflectors at Mark 10, along with Mako gear. We'll have to see what prices for this come out as. Mark 11 equivalent, cutting beam array. Haven't seen one of those before. I'll have to try and get up to tier 2 and see what that actually has by way of stats. Tier 3, again, they get passive. Mark 12, generic anti-Borg stuff. Mark 11, assimilated Borg gear. Now that's interesting because as far as I remember, that is what you get, or at least used to get, via the anti-Borg and 5 EDC missions. So, Mark 11, Mako and Omega gear. Do tier 4, anti-Borg combat consumables, tier 2. Mark 12 arm weapons. Omega torpedo launcher, which is new again. I'll have to try and find the stats for that. And the Mark 11 Mako and Omega stuff. Final tier, of course, you get the Mark 12 gear. Supposedly, these are going to require an elite token drop. Now, they did say that it was only going to require token numbers of those, which is either a very, very bad pun, or it's a good thing, because, of course, prior to this, the only way to get these was to run the elites and hoped you got the ultra-rare prototype Borg salvage, which left some people very, very annoyed because they had run dozens, if not hundreds of the missions and got nothing, and someone else lucked out, ran 3 elites, and hey presto, had a fully tricked out starship. So that is Omega. Annoyingly, however, there is no mechanism that I can see at the moment to convert the old encrypted data chips. As you can see, these are still running on the system. I assume at some point we'll get a mission to turn these in for reputation, or failing that, we're just going to have to dump them and get the energy credits instead, which would be somewhat vexing. Now, the Romulan missions are pretty similar. Indeed, in many respects, very much the same. Interestingly, advanced prototype deflectors. This is at tier 5. Scorpion fighters as a hanger item rather than a consumable. Plasma high yield torpedo. It will be interesting to see if that's anything other than just a tweaked out tri-cobalt, but we shall see. Again, the usual choices of options. Interesting, you can get Romulan security escorts as a consumable. That's doubled up for some reason. Don't know whether that's just a text glitch or whether the second line's a placeholder for something else yet. Romulan prototype impulse engines and covariants. All in all, fairly similar. As you can see, these missions are on a 1-day, 16-hour cooldown, so I've got one ticking down here. And that's pretty much the rep system as these things go. It's basically your own personal starbase system, which is going to cause a little bit of tension because the other thing that has been introduced is the first pass at the embassy, when it works. There we go. So, 2 tiers, diplomacy and recruitment tracks, 3 tiers in each track, and very much select active projects. This is all going to be very familiar with Starbase fleets. If you haven't seen this before, well, this is basically how the Starbase system works. A lot of the missions require embassy provisions, nothing particularly complex about getting those. If I can remember how the UI works, they're simply in the embassy provisions at 650 energy fleet credits a pop. So if you're hanging off on buying fleet gear, or if you've just got your stuff and you have credits to sink, well, there you go. Recycling, ladies and gentlemen, it is good. Now, as you can see, these are fleet missions, so the requirements are comparatively high. 300 entertainment provisions for recruitment drills? Yep, I suppose that kind of makes sense. Join the Federation. We've got really cool holodeck programs. If you live more than a week, you might even get to use them. So, let me see, what do we get by way of rewards? So, personal transwarp transporters allows you to beam to the embassy interior for everywhere. That's basically an equivalent of the transwarp drive on the fleet location. Interestingly, they've just folded it into the embassy rather than having you upgrade the transporter station. Curiously, there's no mention of a cooldown, although I imagine there'll be one. It will be somewhat vexing, of course, if that cooldown is shared with your starship's transwarp drive. Hopefully that won't happen. Interfleet shuttle. Yes, you can get directly to the fleet starbase from the embassy. No mention, by the way, of being able to get back, although it is kind of implied. Personal tailor, although you've already got one on the starbase, which you can get to quite quickly. So I'm honestly not sure what that is going to achieve, although I do note you get a unique costume. Presumably that'll be a Romulan-esque uniform option of some kind. The diplomats allow you to bring in science consoles, ultra-rare Mark 10s, so presumably, well, given that each Mark tends to be equivalent to a quality level upgrade, go and compare Mark 10 greens and Mark 11 whites for weapon consoles and look at the numbers. I have to wonder why they didn't just go with Mark 11 rares, but meh, there we go. Mark 11s again for science. Mark 12 ultra rare. If we get field generators on those, it's going to be interesting. Oh, and you could call in fleet scimitars. And I've no idea what a psionic pacifier is. I assume it's some kind of AoE calming effect, but we shall see. On the embassy, you get a Romulan duty officer, bridge officer recruitment. So if you want your ships stocked with Romulans, that'll never end badly. Yes, you can, along with ground kit variants going up to Mark 12. Again, we'll have to try and get the embassy up to speed to see what those can do. So that is pretty much that. essentially it's an outgrowth of the starbase system. There's an interesting little bug here. There are supposed to be functional arrows here and here to allow you to switch. As it is, you have to switch forwards and backwards manually. Curiously, if I close that and reopen it, the arrow actually works one way. So, no idea what is going on here. It doesn't work on holdings, does work on overview. Can't help but note that that needs to be fixed, and actually an image added in there. And it would be nice to have the option to switch forwards and backwards here on the holdings tab, since we've got blank bits of UI that could be used, rather than having to go through the tabs like so. Right, well, that is pretty much it. That is basically the reputation system as it currently stands, along with the embassies. I will have to try and run a few missions and get that ground up so I can get into the stores, and when I've done that, I'll let you know what kind of prices we're going to be paying for the new gear. Other than that, Captains, I have been Yusril, and I will see you for the next Tribble Timewarp.